Welcome to Luma Sleep, where stories slow the world down and help you find rest. I'm Luma, your guide tonight. Thanks for being here. Tonight, we'll drift, not into answers, but into the gentle in-between, where breath becomes the only thing to hold. Let your thoughts stay where they've fallen, like feathers on a forest floor. If your eyes are still open, let them soften, not like doors shutting, but like wings folding. Let your spine remember it is not a pillar, but a ribbon. Your hands unclenched, at rest, empty, but not lost. The world has turned its face toward silence, and you, beloved listener, may do the same. Feel the surface beneath you, offering no resistance, like soil that cradles roots. Inhale gently, exhale slowly. You are not being asked, only to be here, breathing. Now let the world soften with you. Let the edges blur. Let the light drift, not from the lamp, but the kind that glows when someone is resting. Feel the hush that doesn't fill your ears, but reminds them they weren't made only for noise. Stillness is not silence, it is presence, and it has curled itself beside your breath. This story will not call you, it will not knock. It arrives like dusk, slow and certain. So lie back, let your edges blur, and quietly, without even knowing it, you are ready for the story to begin. There is a kind of quiet that lives beneath what once lifted us, not in grief, but in change. A hush that arrives when something you loved no longer fits the way it once did. A song unsung, a dream that once had wings and then didn't. It's not sorrow, it's the stillness after movement, where the earth remembers you once rose and waited for your return. You've known this space, the soft pause before a step, the moment your fingers hover over a photograph but don't touch, the comfort of a coat you no longer wear but cannot give away, not because you need it, but because it still knows your shape. The fairy who no longer flies does not mourn the sky. She walks now, slow through tall grass, wings folded, not broken, just quiet, just resting. And the ground holds what the sky lets go. It does not ask why feathers fall. It only says, you are here now, and that is still beautiful. You didn't fall, you returned, not to escape, but to feel rooted again. Stillness here is not silence, it is presence, the kind that listens, the kind that waits, the kind that remembers. And if you're quiet enough tonight, you might hear it whisper, I'm still here. And maybe, for now, that's enough. She had no name, the forest could speak aloud, but if you listened closely, you might hear it in the soft sound of moss settling beneath her steps. She walked now, always, quietly, not with purpose, not with sorrow, but with the patience of someone who once flew and now chooses to stay near the ground. Her wings were still there, folded, small, not broken, only tired. They no longer shimmered like morning frost. They no longer sang when wind passed through them, but they moved slightly when she breathed, as if they, too, were learning how to be still. She wore no shoes. Her soles knew the path better than any map could. Her toes curled against bark, pressed into wet leaves, brushed across the edges of forgotten roots. Sometimes she carried a small pouch tied with faded thread, not for spells, not for offerings, just to hold the things she found: a petal with no flower, a stone warm from nowhere, a piece of bark shaped like a sigh. She didn't speak to the trees, but they leaned slightly as she passed, the way one might toward a remembered voice. And in return, she nodded, not in greeting, but in agreement, as if to say, "Yes, I remember too." She never looked up, not because she was afraid to, but because the ground had become enough. She carried little, almost nothing really, not because she lacked, but because she knew how much could be held in silence. Her pouch, woven from old strands of vine, hung gently at her side. It did not swing, it did not clink. It rested as she did, without weight, without need. Inside it, only a few things: a threadbare piece of silk, once the color of wind before sunrise, a pine cone that had cracked but never fallen apart, a feather gray and bent, its shaft worn soft from years of being touched but never used, and a single dull stone, round, smooth, impossibly warm. She had picked it up long ago, when her wings had first refused the sky, not in anger, not in grief, but in the way one kneels when they finally understand that stillness is not the same as stopping. No one saw what she carried, not because it was hidden, but because it asked for nothing. It did not shimmer, it did not glow, but it pulsed gently when she pressed her hand against her side, the quiet rhythm of memory that no longer needed to rise. She did not speak of these things, not to the birds, not to the leaves, not even to the breeze that still sometimes played along the curve of her shoulder. But when she paused, and she often did, she would close her eyes and let one hand settle over her pouch. And in that moment, she looked not grounded, but whole, as if the things she carried were not remnants, but reminders, not of who she was, but of how far she had come. She had never been one for spells, but she made rituals, small ones, soft ones, not to change the world, but to stay in rhythm with it. Each morning, she turned over one stone by her doorstep, not to see what lay beneath, but to remind the earth she had returned. At twilight, she placed 3 drops of water onto a leaf, let them roll down the stem without guiding them. It wasn't a message, it wasn't magic. It was simply her way of saying thank you to something that had never stopped holding her. Inside her hollowed tree, she kept no mirrors, only bowls filled with quiet things, dried herbs she never used, strands of her own hair collected after combing, and petals that had fallen without ever blooming. She touched them sometimes, gently, like one would touch the edge of a page in a book they'd never finish reading. She swept the threshold not to keep it clean, but to feel the bristles cross the grain of the wood. She tied knots in thread with no pattern, lit no flames, whispered no words. But the space around her began to shift in small ways. Moss grew thicker near her steps. Insects moved slower when she passed. And sometimes, just sometimes, the wind hesitated as if to ask before entering. She did not ask to be remembered. She did not leave marks where she went, but the forest kept track of her anyway. Not in bark, not in stone, but in rhythm, because every gesture she made was not for show, but for belonging, not to the sky she once knew, but to the ground that now knew her. And in those rituals, the slow, the silent, the seen by no one, she did not mourn the fairy she once was. She simply lived as the one she had become. It happened without announcement, without reason. The air, always in motion, always whispering, grew still, not dead, not heavy, just listening. The leaves, which normally danced without needing music, hung motionless, as if holding a breath too sacred to exhale. She noticed first in the silence, not the kind that empties, the kind that gathers, the kind that leans in. She was gathering herbs just beyond her hollow, low to the ground, palms pressed lightly to the stems so she wouldn't bruise their shape when the world stilled. No bird called, no twig cracked. Even her breath seemed reluctant to disturb what had arrived. It was not fear, not surprise, only attention. She stood slowly, turned her face not toward the sky, but toward the trees, and in their silence she heard something more solid than sound, an invitation not to move, not to act, but to stay. The wings at her back shifted slightly, not to lift, but to listen, and her hands, so used to tending, simply hung at her sides as the forest began to remember her. It was lying on the edge of a stone she passed every evening, a stone half covered in moss, half forgotten by the path. The feather was not from her, not from any wing she had known. It was longer, darker, tipped in pale ash gray, like smoke curling against sky. And it hadn't fallen. She could feel that. It had been placed, not by hand, but by intention. There was no wind to carry it, no branch above to drop it. And yet, there it was, still, upright, balanced as though waiting for her to notice it wasn't moving. She knelt beside it slowly, as if approaching something sacred. Her wings shifted, reflexively, faintly, and then settled. She didn't touch it, didn't take it. She only sat beside it, and something inside her, some old echo of what it once meant to rise into air, sighed. Not in longing, not in grief, just in recognition, as if the feather and the folded wings had met before, somewhere between sky and surrender. She stayed until dusk. The feather never moved, and when she rose, she left it behind, not because it wasn't hers, but because it didn't need to be carried. It had already spoken. She wasn't looking for signs, not anymore, not the kind that glimmered, not the kind that led. She was simply walking, bare feet, pressing softly into the cool, damp earth, her pouch tucked against her side, her hands open, unguarded. And the branch, it moved, not suddenly, not as if shaken by wind or brushed by some passing bird. It moved the way a shoulder does when you lean towards someone you trust. Barely, but enough. A slender curve of bark lowering itself, quietly, without sound, until its tip rested just above her path. She stopped, not startled, just still. The wings at her back stirred faintly, not lifting, just remembering. She reached up, not to touch, not to take, only to be near. Her fingers hovered a breath away from the branch, and something passed between them. Not energy, not magic. Something older, quieter, like shared history, like mutual noticing. And the branch, once bent, stayed where it was, not offering, not demanding, only acknowledging. She lowered her hand. The forest sighed, not in wind, in welcome. And as she stepped forward, leaving the branch behind, she did not look back. She didn't need to, because when a place bends toward you, gently, deliberately, you carry the gesture even after it's gone. It was a tree she'd passed 100 times or more. Never the largest, never the oldest, just a slender trunk tilted slightly as if mid-curtsy. She had walked by it so often that her eyes no longer paused at its shape. But today, as the hush of late light gathered at her heels, she stopped. Not because she saw it, because she felt it see her. There was nothing marked, no carving, no wound. But in the place where bark turned silver in the slant of dusk, there was a shape. Barely a curve, barely a spiral, but familiar. Her hand lifted slowly, as if drawn, not by memory, but by belonging. And when her fingers brushed the grain, not pressing, only touching, the air around her shifted. The moss grew quieter, the leaves stopped rustling, even her own breath seemed to lean in. It wasn't a letter, it wasn't her name, but it was her, etched into the bark not by blade, but by presence, the long echo of years walked in soft repetition. The forest had written her into itself, not to claim her, only to remember. And as she stood there, one wing shifting gently against her shoulder, she did not feel small. She felt real, not in flight, but in form. And the tree, silent, slender, patient, did not bow. It simply stayed, as if to say, "So will I." It wasn't the quiet above the ground that held her now. It was the hush beneath it, the kind of silence you only feel when your feet have stood long enough in one place to be accepted. She knelt, not to gather, not to study, just to feel, her fingertips pressed gently into the moss, where its softness had thickened with time. There, beneath her skin, beneath the roots, beneath even the oldest stone, something stirred. Not movement, not sound. A knowing, like warmth without heat, like memory without story. She closed her eyes. The wings on her back, quiet as always, folded more tightly, as if listening too. There were no voices, no images, only the press of presence, like soil holding the shape of what once rested upon it. And in that stillness, she remembered nothing specific, only that she belonged, not as a visitor, not as a creature of elsewhere, but as part of what grows slowly and never seeks to rise. She pressed her palm deeper until it met something cool and steady, a root, perhaps, or the edge of an old stone. She did not ask, she did not name it. She only remained, her breath slowing, her bones quiet, until the silence beneath the soil welcomed her as one of its own. It came without ceremony. The sun, which had been trailing slowly across the trees, simply paused, not gone, not fading, just still. The kind of stillness that isn't absence, but presence holding its breath. She stood at the edge of a clearing she hadn't meant to find. The air there was tinged with gold, but not bright, as if the light itself was remembering what it once touched and didn't want to leave. Her shadow stretched before her, long and soft, but did not grow, did not change. Even time, it seemed, was leaning in. She stepped forward once, twice, and the leaves beneath her did not rustle, they listened. The wings at her back, those quiet, folded things, shifted, not in longing, but in rhythm with something more ancient than the sky. The light did not guide, it did not warm. It rested, held, as if saying, "This moment is not for moving, this is where you stay." She let her arms fall to her sides, let her eyes soften into the shimmer that was not quite dusk, not quite dawn, and in that unmoving glow, she did not feel watched. She felt seen, not for what she'd been, not for what she might become, but for what she was, still here, now. And the light, unchanged, undemanding, remained a little longer, just enough to say, "You are enough even without flight." It wasn't warmth like sun, not heat, not light. It was the kind that gathers quietly just behind you, where wings used to rise. She felt it as she crouched beside a tree older than memory. It didn't pull, it didn't push, it just arrived, like a hand hovering but never touching. A hush that curled around the spot where flight had once begun. She didn't turn, she didn't need to. The warmth wasn't a visitor, it wasn't someone returning. It was a remembering, not hers, the forest's. Because even when wings no longer lift, the air remembers how it felt to catch them. And even the stillest shoulders carry the shape of what once unfolded from them. She let her back lean just lightly into the feeling, not to reclaim flight, but to rest in the knowing that it had happened, that she had flown, that she had fallen, that she had stayed. And the warmth remained, not because she needed it, but because it needed her to feel that she was still enough. It had always been there, tucked in the bottom of her pouch, round, smooth, unremarkable, but she never left without it. Not because it was special, because it stayed. Today, she brought it out, not as a ritual, not for meaning, just because her hand wanted to hold something that wouldn't change. She sat beneath a willow that bent like a mother over a cradle. It no longer rocked. The stone rested in her palm, cool at first, then slowly taking her warmth into its center. She didn't speak, didn't think, only breathed. And the stone, quiet and old and still, seemed to hold that breath, as if it had always known how to carry what others let fall. Her fingers curled around it, not tightly, not protectively, only with presence. And in that still circle of moss, shadow, and slow wind, something softened. Not her wings, not her heart. Something deeper, the part of her that had always been just beyond her own reach, the part that never asked why she could no longer fly, because it already understood. She exhaled, and the stone warmed. Not like magic, not like flame, like memory being accepted. And when she placed it gently on the soil beside her, she didn't let go to forget. She let go to be free. It didn't come from the trees, not this time, not from the wind or the moss or the hush between birdsong. The whisper rose from within, quiet, unformed, not words, not thought, just a softness, like breath remembering how to speak without being heard. She was sitting now, knees drawn close, her back resting against a root that curled like a question no one needed answered. And there, in the space between her ribs and silence, the whisper arrived. It didn't say, "You are meant to fly." It didn't promise, "You will again." It simply said, "You are." Not as a hope, not as a future, as a presence, here, now. She let the wings at her back shift once, not in yearning, but in recognition. They would not rise, not tonight, maybe not ever, but they had heard her, and she had heard herself. Not the voice she once used to sing through clouds, the one that lives in stillness, in moss, in memory, in ground that holds instead of lifts. The whisper faded like mist, not vanishing, just retreating into her chest where it belonged. And she, tired in the quiet way that follows deep truth, laid back against the soil, not to dream, not to sleep, but to rest in the sound of her own presence. And the world around her remained still, because even the forest understood that sometimes, to finally hear yourself, you must stop flying. She rose not because something called her, but because nothing did. The forest had grown still again, not empty, but complete. There was no farewell, no wind through branches, no shimmer in the trees. Only quiet, the kind that happens after someone speaks the one thing they had been holding for a very long time. She did not look back. There was nothing behind her that hadn't already become part of her. The moss did not bow, the leaves did not stir, the path did not rearrange to guide her home. Because this time, she knew the way without needing the earth to remind her. Each step was slow, not in sorrow, in stillness. The kind of stillness that remains after something ends without breaking. Her wings remained folded, not from shame, from peace. And the forest, so full of memory, did not try to follow, because it had given what it came to give. And she, in return, had received it in full. Her cottage waited exactly as she left it. The door leaned gently in its frame, the window half latched like a sigh, left unfinished. Inside, the hearth had gone cold. The air was not stale, only undisturbed. She stepped inside without sound. Her feet knew the floorboards the way old hands know the curve of a loved one's wrist. She did not light a candle. The light already there was enough. A hollow glow that came not from flame, but from presence. It filled the corners like dust that has never been cleaned away because it, too, belongs. She placed her pouch on the table, not carefully, not with ceremony, only with truth. Its contents shifted gently, feather, stone, thread, memory, and settled without fuss. She did not need to unpack them. They had already returned with her. She stood in the center of the room for a long time, not thinking, not planning, just allowing the stillness to arrive. And when it did, she sat, not in her chair, not on her bed, on the floor, legs tucked beneath her, arms resting where they fell. She leaned back against the wall and let the hush fill her body like a lullaby without melody. Nothing moved, nothing asked, nothing waited. And she, no longer seeking sky, no longer holding ache, closed her eyes. The room did not dim, it simply faded, as if exhaling. Her breath, no longer caught between effort and stillness, settled into a rhythm older than words. She did not try to sleep, she only let go of staying awake. A feather, one she hadn't placed, one not from her pouch, rested near the hearth, its edge caught gently against a splinter in the floor. She saw it just before her eyes closed, did not reach for it, did not question, just allowed it to be there. And somewhere between that allowing and her final breath of the day, she felt the echo of something once lifted, not rising again, but resting fully. The wings on her back didn't stir, they didn't need to, because they were no longer measured by their motion. They were part of her story, and the story for tonight had come to stillness. No end, no beginning, only breath, and the breath stayed, quiet, present, full. That night, she did not latch the window. She left it slightly open, just enough for air to drift in if it wished. The curtain moved like breath, not wind, not weather, just presence. She lay on her side, blanket drawn across one leg, the other bare to the coolness of night. One hand beneath her cheek, the other resting lightly on her chest, where her breath rose and fell like wings that no longer flew but had never stopped moving. She did not think of the forest. She did not need to. It was in her now, not as memory, as rhythm, the kind that lingers in your limbs long after the song has ended, the kind that lives not in story, but in sleep. Outside, an owl shifted somewhere unseen. Inside, the stone beside her pouch warmed slightly, then cooled again. She felt none of it, only the slow stillness that arrives when everything has been given and nothing more is asked. In the quietest part of night, when even dreams have fallen silent, there was a movement, so small, so slow, it could have been mist shifting or shadow turning. But it wasn't. It was her wing, the left one, the quieter one, the one that used to fold first after flight. It moved, not to rise, not to fly, but to rest closer to her spine, as if to say, I remember. And the body beneath it, the heart inside it, heard that gesture without sound. No one saw it, no one needed to. It wasn't meant to be noticed, only felt. A final curl, a soft return, not to sky, but to self. And as the wings settled, as breath grew shallower, as the world leaned in to listen to her sleep, something in the hush spoke back, not in words, not in wind, just a presence, small, steady, and endless. The whisper she had carried for so long no longer hovered beside her. It had become her, and the forest, the sky, the stone, the ground, all of them knew she was no longer waiting to fly. She had arrived where wings are not needed. And the wing, that quiet memory of sky, stayed with her, always. That night, long after the world had quieted, long after even dreams had dissolved into shadow, the room grew still in a different way. Not heavy, not empty, just full of something unspoken. She lay curled beneath a light blanket, one arm tucked gently beneath her cheek, the other resting on the place her wings had once carried everything. Her breath moved like tide, soft, slow, steady, and in the hush that only arrives when the heart has nothing left to ask, something shifted. A single wing, not the one she used to favor, not the one that had always led in flight, but the quieter one, the one that followed and bore the weight, unfolded. Not high, not far, just enough to brush the edge of the pillow. And then, stillness, not because it had grown tired, but because it had remembered what it meant to stay. No sound marked the moment, no breeze stirred the curtain, only the gentle exhale of a creature who had nothing more to carry and nowhere else to be. And the wing, the one she thought she had lost, remained, not to rise, not to lift, but to hold her where she already was. Because flight was never the only way to be free, and the wing, soft and still and full of memory, stayed with her. Like breath, like story, like a whisper folded into sleep.